video games industry sits at the nexus of tech, entertainment, and sports. In 2021, video games were a $180 billion global business, and more than 465 million people told market research firm Newzoo that they watched esports events. But the group Black in Gaming found that just 2% of people working in the industry are Black, and other data indicate that only 24% of global game developers are women, and 3% identify as non-binary. Let's first briefly talk about the state of play when we think about the gaming industry and diversity and inclusion. Nicole, let's start with you. What did you find when you joined the esports space, not just among players, but in other roles?
Thanks, Dina. And yes, it's good context. I am a newcomer relative to the esports community. I've been with Evil Geniuses about 3 years. And upon my entrance, I was actually one of the first and only female representatives in an esports leadership position globally, which is a little ridiculous, as for us and for those that are less familiar about esports, we probably bridge that sports and athletic side of gaming and entertainment to the world. But despite about 45% of US gamers being women, less than 3% are at the highest level of competitive play, which for me as a team owner tells me I am not recruiting or finding the breadth of potential best talent by being blind to the diversity problems of access and accessibility in this space. So it's always an uphill battle for us as we try to find and make the space inclusive and encompassing, because without that, it's a business, financial, and cultural problem.
And Sarah, you joined the gaming world about 5 years ago from the mobile carrier space. What was your experience coming into this industry?
You know, when I first came in, a lot of people asked me as I was considering the role if it was something I really wanted to do. Because it is an industry, just with the stats that you stated, that really has a history of being very inclusive. But what I found is that it's also an industry that there's so much opportunity for change. And in particular, I was very inspired by the work that we do at Xbox and at Microsoft to help drive that. Because, you know, as a gaming platform, you have an opportunity to give opportunities to creators that others don't, and to make sure that they can actually be seen on the platform and can come and be on Xbox. And so the process over the last 5 years of just working with the team has been really inspiring, because we actually sort of open up that aperture. One program that I really love is the ID at Xbox program that we have. If you're not familiar with it, it enables anyone to self-publish a game on Xbox. You go to ID at Xbox, ID at Xbox.com, you submit your concept. And when your concept is approved, we actually send you all the things that you need to be able to complete your game and to publish it on Xbox. And we've had over 2,000 games come to us through that program, because we've just sort of democratized the ability to reach the console and to reach our user base. And many of the most diverse and new perspective games that we have on the platform have come through it, which is really inspiring.
Now, Tanya, you're a gaming industry veteran. What have you seen in your time at in this space? Is it evolving better, evolving worse, still really challenging?
Well, I'll say we've published 2 of those democratized games on ID at Xbox. It is indeed a great program.
That's awesome.
And generally, the pattern over my career has been to see that creators have more and more tools, both in terms of engines and in terms of self-publishing. It feels like there is greater availability of creators to be able to reach consumers, at the same time as the wider culture across the world is talking about more and more nuanced topics of diversity and representation, and different ways that creators are either empowered or the opposite.
Let's break that down into a couple of different component parts. Let's talk about what you and your companies are doing to improve the equality and diversity situation. And let's start a little bit on the workforce issues. Sarah, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the work that Microsoft has been doing to recruit and retain a more diverse workforce in its gaming business?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, change starts at the very top. And I feel really privileged because at Xbox, I actually work with the most diverse leadership team that I've ever worked with in my life. And I think it is, although, I haven't compared everywhere, one of the most diverse leadership teams in gaming, certainly of a major platform. And we recently actually sort of published a graphic that showed the leadership team, and that has a big impact because in the culture, you can't see it if you can't be it, and it has done a lot for just changing the culture within our team, changing the nature of conversations that we have. To share a story about it, to get specific, every year when we actually curate the games that go into our E3 show, we go through a real process. We look at all the games for color palette and pacing and nature of gameplay, because we're really trying to create something that represents the full breadth of games out in the world and that are being developed. And a couple years ago, we were doing that, and there was this one game, The Gunk, where the asset wasn't quite as refined at the last final review as some of the other assets in the show. And so we were discussing whether or not it made sense to put the game in the show. And I said, you know what? I talked to the team. They said they're going to send us one more asset on Thursday. It'll come in at 11 p.m. on Thursday. I'll stay up late and watch it. And if it clears the bar, we'll put it in the show. And I did that. I stayed up late. I watched the asset. It cleared the bar, and we put it in. And when we released the show, it was one of the top games that was actually trending on Twitter. I was sort of pleasantly surprised because I had known sort of how close it was to being in or out. And I turned to my daughter afterwards and I said, hey, of all the games that we showed in the show today, what's the one you love the most? And she said, The Gunk. And I said, why did you love it the most? And she said, because the character looks like me. And I realized that we all have unconscious bias. That's human. Sometimes we use those words like it's a judgment on someone, but you can't help, have bias based off of just how you grew up and the things that you were exposed to. But the issue we face is if everybody who has a certain type of bias, those are all the people making the decisions, that's when you get to things that aren't truly representative. But purely because I was in the room, I just saw something a little different from everybody else saw in the room, but we ended up creating a better show, right? And so it starts with that top. But then, once you have that at the top, there's a ton of work that you have to do, and I think it's really cultural work to drive true change. A lot of people talk about just like the numbers, the diversity numbers, and you can start there, but it's about anybody and everybody feeling like they can do their best work. And I don't think there's any one lever, and I see some of you sort of nodding your heads as I'm talking about this, right? It's what type of conversations we have, how inclusive is it, how vulnerable do people feel like they can be, can they actually tell their true story at work? How do you create employee resource groups and places where people can connect and all of those things? And we just work on that every single day. And I've seen so much growth and change in the Xbox team over the last 5 years. And we've come a long way. We've got far to go, but it gives me a lot of hope and joy for the future.
Tanya, you mentioned to me that a lot of what you focus on is not bringing in new people, but helping those who are already in the gaming industry survive and thrive. Talk to me about why that is and the work that you've done through Pixels.
Well, it actually ties into a lot of what Sarah's talking about. If you just focus on the lower level hiring and the getting their foot in the door, and you put them in an organization that hasn't started that conversation from the top, you're setting them up for a very difficult time. Even if their workplace is very well intentioned, if all of the leadership is of a certain type and they hire someone not of that type and they're alone, they're naturally going to have a harder time. They're just going to feel more isolated, if not tokenized. And one of a story that I sometimes am sad to remember is that we had a mentorship program that we set up, and one of my close friends was a mentor. And she said, Tanya, I can't mentor for you anymore. And I was like, well, why? I thought you were having a great time. And she was like, well, I have been, but you paired me with somebody who their dream job is to work at this studio I'm still paying a therapist for. And I can't give them advice ethically on how to work there. So I don't think I can help them with that. And I was like, you know what, that's really fair. And when we actually looked at it, we realized that, after a few years, a lot of the people we had helped, get into the industry, they needed to get out of it again. So we've been much more conscious of trying to pay attention to places where the leadership has become more diverse, places where employee resource groups are actually a helpful tool for employees to become hopefully not just surviving and contributing, but actually valued members of leadership. Because if that's not a possibility where they are, they probably need to go somewhere else. And we can be an impartial third party helping them with that. So yeah, we've basically changed our focus from helping people get a job to helping people hopefully inspire others.
Nicole, most of what we see in esports is the players, and people look at who the players are and where they come from. And Evil Geniuses was the first team to have 2 women on a gaming team with your Valorant squad. But you also mentioned to me how important it is to focus on the other roles, the coaches, the people who work on the business side. And over at Evil Geniuses, you've been running conferences, you've been running an internship program to diversify those areas. Tell me about that.
Yes, and I so strongly agree with what both Tanya and Sarah mentioned around starting at the top and making sure you have the back end infrastructure to support and really walk the walk of the initiatives that you like to present and talk about. And where esports differs a bit from the professionalism of, I'd say, developers and studios is it was very grassroots. Even 3 years ago, a lot of esports organizations were underfunded and not well infrastructured, and much of leadership came from being a pro player or a coach of the past. And so we really had to tackle from both ends. How do you get diverse talent from the top who historically don't come from the gaming space? And e.g., it took us a while. I'm 3 years in, and not until maybe 60 days ago did I complete my leadership team, where we're now over 50% female at the executive level and over 50% people of color. But also building ground up, because I won't shy away from the bias, and even maybe some of the bias of listeners of what is esports? Is that a real career path? That is it legit in terms of aspirations and stickiness of your own personal career growth? And so to make sure people see a path to real, tangible, and high potential career opportunities in this space from any background, let alone women or gender or religion or nationality, it took it took a lot of programming and intentional work. Part of that is how we scout and recruit on the gaming side. We use, like a lot of traditional sports, we've invested heavily in empirical methods and data-driven scouting and recruiting, because unlike traditional sports, we're not an inherently gendered sport. And on the board, we call it from game to boardroom, and from the staff and the infrastructure to continue to further support the messaging, again, showcase the values that we want to uphold. We really have recruited and invested in finding talent in spaces that historically haven't been in gaming, and making sure we know and we highlight that this is a safe space for anyone to participate in.
I want to move to talking about content diversity. Sarah, in your last answer with that lovely story about the gunk and your daughter, and I so love that story, because all 3 of you, when we were talking before this conference, mentioned the importance of representation to bringing gamers in, that people have to see themselves on the screen, and being the players and the creatives. I want to talk a little bit about content diversity. I saw a report from Diamond Lobby that looked at the 100 biggest games from 2017 to 2021 and found that nearly 80% of the main characters were male, 54% of the main characters were white. Only 8.3% of games had a female main character of color. So that's what we're up against here. So I want to talk a little bit about some experiences that you've had here, and what kind of work you have all done, as well as the challenges of getting games to be more popular with diverse characters and themes. So, Tanya, I want to start with you. In your dating simulation game, Boyfriend Dungeon, the game tried to represent a variety of relationship types that the players could choose from. Tell me about that, and what was the reaction from your gamers, particularly your gamers who identify as LGBTQ?
Well, it actually started as a desire to see my own play experience represented. I was a lover of romantic RPGs. There haven't been that many, but those few that were out there I really loved. And some years ago, I was talking with my partner saying, it's really sad that I can't date the women or this other alien or whoever. Like, I want to date everybody. And my partner was like, well, you should make Boyfriend Dungeon, ha ha ha. And I laughed as well. And he said, no, I'm serious. You should make Boyfriend Dungeon. And it took some years before we got there, but that was how the game idea came about. And then later we realized that, oh, you should be dating swords and so on. You can go play the game to find more details. But to answer your question, Dina, once we started digging into it and really thinking about, well, what does it mean to be able to date anyone? And what does it mean to feel included in something? We had a very diverse team in terms of sexuality and gender and nationality and language. We didn't have a ton of diversity in terms of that many people of color or accessibility or a few other vectors of marginalization, but we were able to hire sensitivity consultants. But with even just the sexuality and gender diversity of our team, we were able to touch some gamers really meaningfully. Most of the awards we've been nominated for have been social impact, even though we didn't set out to do anything socially impactful. All we wanted to do was make a game that made people feel included. But apparently that's a progressive statement to some people. And it sticks out because we weren't telling one particular story. We were just trying to let people love who they wanted to love and make some likable characters of all types. And I'm glad that some people felt that was worthwhile. You know, the GLAAD awards or the gaming awards. It's been a really, really lovely reception.
And Nicole, when we were talking about this, you mentioned to me that one challenge in the esports world and in getting new games and a wider selection of games to take off is that, the games which an esports athlete specializes in and which games teams focus on are big decisions with huge investment of time and resources by players and teams. How does that factor in when we think about getting more diverse content to take off in esports? And what have you seen work well?
So I have to first tangent because I think Tanya is being very humble. As a big fan of Moon Hunters, I can say that the Kitfox games are fantastic, not only from a gameplay, but having unique characters that you can relate to and get excited by. So that end of that tangent.
Thank you so much.
No, big fan. But on the esports side, so it's interesting because we don't own the games, but the challenge we have is unlike an NBA team or an NFL team, the sport of basketball or football doesn't tend to change or adjust or isn't owned by a private company that has other competing interests at heart. And so a good example is EG used to be world champs in a game called Halo, and the competitive scene of Halo is not as big as it once was. So we have to be kind of on our toes of not only what are the games that we need to be in and why, but also what are the games that are coming that will be relevant for us. And EG, we really maximize the athletic integrity and championship mindset more than other factors. And so we're always trying to find games that we know we can lift trophies in. But one interesting, we call in our decision-making matrix that we've highlighted is that games tend to have betters. I'm sure Sarah would also know, and even Tanya, like games that have characters represented in a diversity sense really resonate well globally. In terms of people that see themselves. And so especially games that have really been profound and diverse cast of characters, even in the competitive scene, while it's not a direct linear decision-making for us, it is a good indicator for how sticky and multi-generational and tenured a game might be in market. And so it is something we pay attention to and look at. What I also love too is from a competitive standpoint, our players are focused on winning. And if they have to win as a female character, as a purple character, as an alien, it creates a bit of an equalizing mindset of what is gender and what can I be and what represents me, because they're focused on what will get me the best results. And it might be an old person character, young person character. And so it definitely serves as a opening of the mind of what is and what isn't in the gaming space.
Great. Sarah, if I can shift the question a little bit for you, because you already told us your wonderful story about the gunk. When I think about accessible content and tools, I also think about the community of gamers with disabilities. Can we talk a little bit about what Microsoft has done to better serve that community?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, we want everyone to like enjoy and be able to embrace the power of play. And just like all the examples of how important it is to be able to see yourself in a game, it's also important that people who have disabilities or limited mobility can also take advantage of games. And so we've done a ton of investment there. Probably the most iconic example is the Xbox adaptive controller. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's really fantastic. It's about this large, and it enables you to sort of reprogram the controls so that you can adjust what you need to do and how you can control the game based off of your ability level. So instead of using your thumb, you can use your elbow, you can use your foot, you can use your knee. And this just opens up so many scenarios for gamers with more limited ability. And I love that particularly in games because that actually enables people to participate and play together on a level playing field and do things in games with their friends that they couldn't necessarily do in real life, which is extremely powerful and meaningful for folks. We also think about it in terms of actually like the settings in games. So Forza Horizon 5 just won a whole bunch of accessibility awards. That's a game we do in Xbox Game Studios. We invest a lot in that. And they actually did both, just enabled and announced they enable both American Sign Language and British Sign Language in the game because that enables people with hearing disabilities to fully participate. And then we have a whole bunch of other things on settings and things that people can do with their Xbox so they can get the fullness of the experience. And so I don't think we're anywhere near the end of the journey there, just like we are on inclusion on other factors, but we're continuing to invest in just making play truly accessible for everyone.
We've only got about 3 minutes left, so this will probably be our last question. I want to talk about how important work culture in work-life balance is to building strong and vibrant and diverse workforces. Nicole, you mentioned to me that, esports gamers used to live together in a house, and that wasn't conducive to attracting people with families. What's changing there?
Yes, earlier I think I said the space was underfunded and a little immature, and that might have been a polite way to describe esports, where even my first day on the job, none of the women's restrooms in their facility worked because there had never been a woman to use them, which was a very fun day one. How do you find the plumber? But regardless, the esports space overall was driven by passion. But the underbelly of that is passion to work for free and be a pro gamer with no potential financial return is also privileged. And not to dismiss the sacrifices and work ethic and grind, but a mother with kids can't live in a studio in Arizona training for a tournament for weeks on end like a lot of young kids. It doesn't foster class mobility, age mobility, anyone with any extenuating life circumstances, even if you had a puppy, that doesn't work, right? And so making sure the infrastructure, as unsexy as it was there from an esports perspective. We were a big first mover in dismantling the gritty grassroots to enable the best of whatever talent, no matter their background or home life needs. So this is a job that has work-life balance, and they can show up and do their best in a way that matters, and we cover the rest. And that was surprisingly revolutionary relatively late in the esports scene development.
And Tanya, let's talk about a game development practice called crunch, which is the practice at game studios where everyone works a ton of overtime to finish a game by the deadline that the studio has set. You, a few years ago had a petition saying crunch is failure. How does that impact the ability of different groups to thrive in the field?
I absolutely have an easier job than someone like Sarah. I mean, I only have 11 employees, so I can very personally follow up with an employee if I feel like they have started falling off the professionalism wagon into crunching themselves and burning themselves out, because that's not in Kitfox's interest. But I'll say that my approach is to approach every single human on their own level, like their own playing field, and ask them what they need, whereas it's a much harder thing when you're a megacorp. But yes, crunch is failure. Let's never do that. Easier said than done.
Totally.
But we're 8 years free.
And Sarah, so tell me, how Xbox looked at this. How has Xbox looked at the impact of work-life balance on employees, and also, I know the deal is not done, but you have a deal to acquire Activision, which has had, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, other publications have reported as a pervasive culture of harassment. How does Xbox think about these issues, and how will you think about it at Activision?
Yeah, I mean, we think about these issues really deeply, and as you said, culture, dignity, and respect, creating an environment where everyone can do their best work is our number one priority. Now, obviously, the Activision deal is going to close in some time, but when they become part of Microsoft and Xbox, those same priorities are going to apply to those teams. The last thought I'd add, just to add on to what others have shared, because we do think about crunch and all of those things and work life balance, is I am really seeing that the advent of hybrid work is opening up a new set of balance for folks and is also making it possible for us to have more diverse teams. And so I just feel a lot of excitement for what that opens up, both for people who are managing things at home, but also people who want to stay located near their families, but still join our industry, and them not having to leave everything behind, their culture, their family, and their loved ones, and move all the way across the country in order to do that. And so that's just a whole new level of balance that's been injected into our lives that I think is going to help us manage both just traditional work-life balance in terms of hours, but just also being able to live your full life with your family and your loved ones while doing work that you love.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Tanya, Nicole, and Sarah, for your time and your wisdom. Thanks so much.